Thanks for everybody for coming out to the April Friday Live. We have these Friday Live meetups once a month. Usually it's the last Friday of each month. This month we got a bunch of different things planned, but they're not really sort of totally cohesive in the sense of it's a bunch of different topics, but hopefully you get some bits and pieces and some learning tidbits out of that. If you have suggestions for upcoming Friday Live meetups or you'd like to present, by all means, we're always looking for guests. I want to start off right away and jump right into things with our roadmap. And I'm just going to share my screen here and just talk about a few things that we've recently shipped. Last month, or sorry, I guess it's really about 2 weeks ago, we shipped version control. I'm not sure if anybody has a chance to use that, but if you do, please do give us feedback so we know what to iterate on. Perhaps there's some more information in there or something like that. That'll serve you well. Version control allows users to roll back the sites, roll back the pages, roll back the entire environments. And then also coming out in probably about 2 releases from now, which will be about a month or so, month and a half, we will be taking that same internal innards of the rollback and we'll be able to replicate apps across different organizations and things like that. We already have that available, but it's just an early alpha right now. BF proxy is something we haven't really talked about, and this is a feature that's more from a support aspect. But the BetterForms proxy basically allows companies who have very, very secure firewalls. They're behind some type of VPN or whatever. It allows the entire BetterForms network to basically funnel through a single IP address, so that way you can whitelist that address and that's fixed. Normally, our infrastructure is such that it's dynamic. That means our data centers can change IPs, and we can provision them. They can fail over and things like that as well. And we do that for a higher availability. But the proxy is only adds a very, very small amount of latency, maybe 5 milliseconds or something, depending on your geographic location, and it allows for those types of clients. BetterForms workshops. We haven't had a ton of people register for those, and so I want to open them up and mention those to everybody. They don't have to necessarily incorporate things like basics. If you're interested in learning a specific topic, by all means, just sign up to the BetterForms workshop, and you can do that via our marketing site through workshops link here. And if you just scroll down to the bottom, it says register for free. There's a calendar link. They're usually on Thursdays. They're not every Thursday, but they're the majority of Thursdays from about 10 o'clock, the same time as today. And bring your stuff and we'll basically code it out together. I usually am there myself, and we'll run through whatever whatever challenges and so on you're having. So think of it like an open office or open support. And finally, application performances. This is really something that we've actually worked on quite a bit. And I think it's for the most part done. Our goal was to increase our load time. Originally, we set a benchmark of about it was around 3.5 seconds or so for a typical app, which is a little bit long. And we've got that down, depending on libraries and things like that, to about a second and a half. It really depends a little bit on the machine. It depends if you visited the app before and a few other things. We're going to continue to make some of those improvements over the next quarter or so, but they're really small ones now. It's really just dialing in things like certain types of caching. BetterForms now has the ability to do caching. You may or may not have noticed this within your app, but if you load an app, and actually let me go back here. If I load an app here and I switch pages, you notice there's no loading indicator here on this particular app. All of this information gets cached locally, so the performance ends up being a lot higher. These are subtle things that don't interfere with anything, and they just sort of roll out in time into your apps. A few things we do have in production right now or in test, and I want to demo some of these features here. The first one, actually, we'll demo some of these a little bit later. I want to talk about a couple things that we're going to be releasing, and one of them is available right today. And I think it's Andrew. Are you going to be demonstrating the multi-page template?
Yep, I will.
All right. Do you want to do that now? And we'll just show that, and I'll just stop my screen share here.
Sure, give me a second to get that set up here.
Sure. Actually, while you're doing that, I'll show you one other quick feature then is a new feature that's coming out. And I'm going to share my other desktop here. And I have, and this is some changes to the way BetterForms handles actions. Actions are like the internal instruction set that BetterForms uses. It's kind of a proprietary sort of language or pseudo language. And I'm just going to go into a random page here in this app. All right. Normally, when we were in the past, when you were working on things like named actions, you would work on the named actions in this page view, and you would add some type of my named action, and you'd have to sort of add that in there manually. So what we've done is we've actually created some UI around this now. One of our team, Michael, is Pearson designed this, and Michael is did the build out. And basically, so here's an example of an on form load. And I want to maybe do something when this form loads. So I can, for example, maybe I want to show a modal. So if I can show a card modal, or let's just find a modal with confirmation buttons and modal dialog. There we go. So now I've added this modal dialog. So basically we still have access to the JSON. At some point in the near future, we'll wrap this with unique UI for each one of these elements. But the bonus is, and as many of you know, you can customize JSON to be exactly whatever you want by including things like calculations and JavaScript and all kinds of stuff in here. So we'll still have access to those underlaying abilities. But let's say we wanted to do something else. Actually, let me cancel this and clear that one there. And I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a lag on this computer here because it's the Wi-Fi is probably a bit slow. All right, and maybe we want to add a function. And maybe after the function, we're going to call a utility hook. And then finally an alert to indicate that something has been done. There's also the ability to rearrange. You can drag and drop the interface here and rearrange all of the actions, go through, edit all the actions, jump into other named actions and so on. So that's a feature that's going to be coming out. It's in beta testing right now. For the people who are beta testing it, if you could give us some feedback, that'd be really good. There's some little things here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty good. It seems pretty stable. And we'll roll that into the UI over the next, probably the next month or so. That'll end up coming into production.
Charles, does that show up then in the page info still as under named actions?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does. It would show up in here when I didn't hit save here, but when you hit save, it would show up in there. It's really the same data, right? Underneath the hood, it's exactly the same data. It's just some UI that's wrapped on top of it. That's all.
Sweet.
It, in all honesty, takes a bit of getting used to, in the sense of we're so used to being code oriented that normally for the first little while, I was forcing myself to use it, but now I actually slightly prefer it. It will make things a lot easier for new users. That's our goal here for that. All right. I'm going to switch it back over to Andrew to tell us about a new template that's coming out, and then I'm going to show one other one after that.
Thanks, Charles. So we've published 2 new templates recently, one being the Google review template that Charles will be showcasing shortly, and the other being a multi-page application template. It's one of the most common workflows that we see in BetterForms, and this is just one version that can be utilized. We created this template out of a skeleton of a previous app currently being used in the wild. As a result, some of the techniques used may be a bit outdated, but at the same time, we really liked some of the more specific features that were used as well. This template utilizes multiple pages for the application form. The other technique that you may be familiar with is having one page, but multiple different states. For example,
Andrew, sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, sorry, I am not sharing my screen. Thank you. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Cool. Right. So the other technique that you may be familiar with for multiple pages is, for example, the editor has multiple different tabs. And the benefit of having just multiple different states is you don't have to pass data in between the pages. This is because the data model is scoped to a single page. But what the template does is that it saves the data being entered into the app model. So let me just fill in a few fields here. And what this template does is once it saves the data into the app model, let me fill in my email. The data gets injected into the app model, and then on form load, we actually inject that data from the app model back into the data model. So you can go back and navigate between the pages, and your data is still there. One of the main benefits of this is that you don't have to fetch data from the back end whenever you want to navigate between pages, and that increases the fluidity and the performance of the whole workflow. The disadvantage of this is that you'll need a different technique to save the data if you want the user to be able to save the progress and come back to the application at a later date. This is something that you might want to do if you have a long application. I won't go into detail too much, but we've seen people use cookies to save someone's session. You could utilize the cache, or maybe have like a button that can save the user's progress and they can come back to it at a later date. The main takeaways of this application is the ability to pass data back and forth between the app and the model. But also what we really like is the ability to have this scroll feature whenever there's an error. The client really likes these blue text boxes, and they have pretty specific use cases for the the responsive design of the page. So if you see here, it's been pretty well built for mobile and desktop use, and it's pretty well built out in the validation techniques as well. But that is mostly it. So I'll just go in and fill out this information here. You can see there's some conditional fields there, and then this summary field that people can use to maybe print off this review or such. But yeah, that would be it. Charles, did you want to show the other template?
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. That's available, or will be available by the end of the day today. Please do give us feedback, because that helps us to dial these things in, right? We sort of look at it from the optic of us, where we kind of know mostly how underlying things work. So it's always better to have a fresh set of eyes to give us some feedback. And of course, like any template or anything in BetterForms, it's 100% flexible, but we just want to give you something that's kind of out of the box, ready to go for these long application processes. I want to jump over to another one here, and I'm going to show the actual app in use, and then I'll show you the template really quick as well. And if you have clients, if you're a consultant, or you have a business where you could use this, I think it'd be really good. It's super simple, and it's like anybody could build this. It's nothing complicated. But what it is a simple reviewing template. So Durham Cleaning Pros is they do SEO for cleaning companies in the Southern Ontario area. And they use this to harvest basically reviews, and they use their marketing to sell the leads to other cleaners. And this is just a really, really simple marketing page. What they do is they gave all of their clients or their cleaners a QR code, and it takes them to this landing page where they can leave feedback, and it basically just says, how are we doing? Of course, it's designed to be responsive. It's really, really easy to change these assets and such. From here, it prompts you for a star rating. And if I pick 3 stars, well, we probably don't want to forward anybody off to Google with only 3-star review. And you see this in iOS apps or any probably apps for the most part. Same idea. It just says, thank you. Your feedback is incredibly valuable, blah, blah, blah. And it takes us to this termination page or final page. If I go back here and I do this again, and I say, how do we do? And I get 4 or 5 stars. And of course, you could adjust this logic. And hit submit, and then it says, thank you, please review us on Google, and it drops us right into the Google review page here. Right now, the main reason here is you want to get that review really at the point of highest, customer satisfaction, right? When they're really buying in, not after they've walked around their house and they find everything's been swept underneath the carpet or something like that. So it's really, really critical for them to harvest these reviews. For this, I think if you have a company that, I don't know if anybody has any companies, but it takes nothing for you to throw up. It doesn't take a web app or sorry, a back end or anything. All you have to do is basically deploy it. It's available now, and Google review app here. You go through, you walk through the process of deploying. And I'm just going to go back at my computer froze here. That's what I was worried about. You walk through the process of deploying it, add a domain, and you'll have to log into your Google account and fetch the two or three things that you'll actually need. I'll just show you really, really quick here. Is configure. If you go into app settings, you basically are going to, it's app settings here. You're basically going to configure a URL here. And in the actual template, we've changed the template around. This is the original source one that we built for somebody, but we changed the template around a little bit. There is also a Google tag that's been removed or moved into this model as well. So it's really, really easy to configure the background image, the Google tag, and you're good to go. And it's a free thing you can offer a client if a client has some use, right? So give it a try, see if you can use it, give us some feedback and how we can improve that, something like that. And would be much appreciated. All right. One other thing too is we did make some changes to collaboration. Most of our users only have one, maybe two developers, maybe 1.25 on average, something like that. But for ourselves, where we're 2 or 3 or 4 people, sometimes even working on an app, we've added some more collaboration, and we're working on the collaboration. We're trying to develop some new techniques here. For example, I'm not in any apps right now. And if I jump into a given application, basically what the system does is it says, hey, is anybody else editing this? Anybody else connected? And it's taking advantage of BetterForms channels. And it's seeing if there's anybody working on that. And if there is, that person is going to claim the page. Hassan and I, and one of our team and I built this together. I think he's presenting some stuff later on that's different. But we think it's going to really, really help you a lot when you are working with 2 people, or you have even multiple tabs open, because now those tabs can't overwrite each other. And when you hit save, the opposite tab will automatically update with information. So the multiple users will stay in sync. And we've implemented this in all areas where people can step on other people's toes. All right, and I'm just going to jump back to, I think that's it for new items in our roadmap that we have. I'm going to demonstrate a couple other things really quick here later on, and I think we're good there. We're going to jump over to Pearson, who's going to present his segment on UX, if he's assuming he's ready to go. And you're,
yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I'm ready to go. Today's segment, I want to focus on filtering data and the value it brings and how to use it effectively, because it is something that I've come across very often with the types of work that we do and the types of work that you guys do. It's just filtering data in these tables is such an important integral part of a lot of these apps. A lot of data searching and just giving the user the ability to find what they're looking for quickly is something that we come across a lot, and it's a very useful tool to understand. So here, I just want to talk about filtering data. Starting off, why are filters even important? For one, it reduces the cognitive load of the user. If they're looking for some kind of information, as specific or as broad as it might be, you don't want it to be difficult to do. You want it to be as easy and as intuitive as possible. In that sense, it will save the user time, so that if they're looking through a database of 1,000 records, there's no reason why they should have to look through each one or scroll down and to find the pagination only shows 50 results at a time. It's much easier. It saves so much more time to just filter down what is the user actually looking for and reducing that return with a smaller batch of records. It also educates the user about the data. So when you have your filtering mechanism, it teaches them a little bit about what is this data, how is it presented, how can I find it, find what I'm looking for easier. It's a means of educating the user about what they're looking at. And lastly, to summarize, it just allows the user to feel more in control, less overwhelmed. Like I said before, the more intuitive it is, the better the experience for the user. So I just want to list some things to consider when you're deciding to use some filtering in your system. What is the data even made of? You know, when building the filters, you need to be aware of how your data is structured. What's the main character string versus was using a main character string versus a Boolean? What's associated with the time frame or date, numerical values versus text strings, all of that kind of stuff changes how the data is presented and the types of data types, or sorry, the different types of selection inputs that you want to use. Next, you want to mirror all the data points in your table. So if you have a table of 6 different columns, each of those columns likely should be able to be filtered. You don't want to present any data that isn't searchable. All your existing data points should be reflected in the filters. As an example, if you show that something sorting by last modified by date in the entry on your item list, your users will expect to be able to find that filter in a modified date section. Next is just understanding your users' priorities. Obviously, that's one of the key things or key elements to UX design is just understanding the user. So take some time to prioritize the order that you'll display your filters in. You know, while it's best to sometimes mirror those column labels, like I said, in the same order that they're presented, sometimes, you know, you might want to, sometimes you might know that the user will be searching by one field 9 times out of 10 versus the other fields. So while this, while you want to mirror as closely as possible to the data you're showing, sometimes it's important to just understand what is the user actually trying to look for. Next is knowing when to stop, knowing when too much is too much, because obviously you don't want to overwhelm the user with too many options. If it's just a list of 10 items, is it really necessary to add a 3-tier system of filtering? You want to come up with your own threshold of where the filters become overkill. Offering advanced filters to your user for a small list of items is unnecessary and complex. But you know your data and you know your users best, so just make sure that you know which filters reflect the depth and volume of the data that you want to show. And lastly, how does your system handle fetching? And unlike the image, I'm not talking about with your dog, but how is the system actually going to present the data that you're filtering? So, for example, there's different ways to filter, or different I guess patterns you might say. There some systems are live filters where you start by filtering one property, and as soon as you select that property, the whole all the results change in that moment live. There's ways to apply filters by individual properties, and there's ways of batch filtering. Batch filtering would be, you set all your filters up at once, and then you click apply, and all those filters are applied at one time. So just understanding what is the best way to fetch that data what would be the most optimal way for the user to use this. That could be if you know that the user is searching a lot of things at once, and they don't know what they're looking for, they're just skimming through a bunch of different information with different properties. Maybe the batch filtering isn't the best way to go about that, because that uses more time. Maybe they know that they're looking for a record by the name of Jimmy, but they don't know whether Jimmy lives in Toronto or if he lives in New York. So he's filtering by different cities, just one after the other. It's those kinds of user experiences or user workflows that you want to be aware of when you're choosing how your system should handle that handle fetching. And that is it for today. I wish I had some actual UI to show, but unfortunately, this Friday Live, it's a little more informational heavy than visual heavy. But just wanted to explain the value and the importance of filtering and how you filter your data and how to think about these questions. Any questions from you guys about filtering and how to use it and what to consider?
Actually,
Charles is just on standby.
sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. My computer just froze up again there. Yeah, somebody actually asked about some different search engine techniques. They're a little bit more back end, like Algolia is one of these companies, and Pinecone, and there's some other mechanisms where you can take your data from the back end. There's kind of, I think they're more leaned a little bit more on the back end techniques. Maybe Pearson, would you be possible to continue this? It's kind of interesting. Maybe next Friday Live, even if that would work, and then maybe we can go through some actual examples of, like, whether it's a before or after, or this is a good search and this is a bad search.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to. I think yeah, filtering, there's so much to talk about, so many different techniques and patterns that you can use. There's definitely a lot more that I could speak on this. Jeremy asked, can you show some various use cases of filtering? And I think we'll try to incorporate that, because we did have a sort of a time limit to some degree. So we'll try to incorporate that in the next Friday Live. Sure. I mean, I guess I could show, if we have time, I could show the most recent example that kind of made me start thinking about filters. And that has to do with the snack app that we're working on. Do you think we have time for that, Charles? We should be fine for time. Yeah, go for it. So with the snack app, this is an app for a food ordering app. I think typically will be at some small kiosks at like a high school football game or something. So users are going to be ordering food from a mobile app. And I've been working on the admin side. So this is the side of the app that only the employees of the kiosk will see, and so they're tracking the orders. So in this case, you have all your orders for the day. You clear them, and they get put into an archive so that you can look back on them days or weeks in the past. So when you get to this archive, you have thousands and thousands of records of all of the orders that were taken in a time span that we haven't even defined yet. But as far as this concept goes, these records go back to the beginning of time, right? So that's a lot of records to look through. And in case someone calls back 2 weeks after they've ordered something and they say, I looked at my receipt and something was wrong, or whatever the case may be, maybe they come back and complain about something that they ordered, and you have to look back 2 weeks ago for this very specific item. Obviously, you're going to need a way to filter this information. So here I designed a mechanism where you have your list of records, and you have a filtering button here, and it brings up a modal. In this case, because it's someone you're likely looking for a very specific entry, and you're likely going to have the information needed to find the exact record. Hopefully maybe this user or maybe this person who's calling knows they have the receipt, and so they know what the order number was, or you have their name and the email address associated with their account. So you know that is John Doe, this is his email, and it was within this date range. And so you'll find the records reduced significantly to help you find exactly what you're looking for. And from here, once you apply those filters, they're represented underneath so that you can see what you've been filtering by. And it's a quick way of, deleting these filters on the fly if you realize that they're not necessary, or you're looking to just clear up some space. So that was the most recent example of a filtering system that made me really have to think about what is the most optimal way to present this. I just did a little bit of research, and I was just finding a lot of new information that I had not thought about before, and I thought that would be useful to share with you guys.
Pearson, I really like that. I got a question in terms of how that mechanism's working. Are you loading all that data prior to filtering, or is it going back to FileMaker to do a search or something on the back end to pull the data in at that point?
I could probably answer that if you want. There's a couple techniques. It really depends on how big your data is, like how deep it, or not how wide it is, but how tall it is, like how many rows. Most of the time, if you're doing this kind of an advanced search, you can make the assumption that in a mature app 3 years into the road, this is going to have thousands and thousands of records. So it's not practical to pull them. What you could do, though, is when the page first loads, you can show the most recent, say 20, which is reasonable to assume that the user might want to grab the first batch. And that gives you something to start with. And then from there, you can invoke either the quick filters or the data range or those tags. And then at that time, you return back to the server, fetch the rest of the records, or fetch the records you want in that found set, truncating it at so many. So you return the first 50 and then maybe set a flag that says there's 50 of 200 found. And then you can add some element into your interface that indicates that there's more than that.
Okay.
The other thing with the tagging, we don't know if we have an example, but it's actually fairly easy to build these tags that are on like this part here. It's not hard to build that and to include that. If you think about this data here is really just a JSON object with or without some of the keys set. So if I'm searching for email, I might have the email key set, and that's just a JSON object. So you basically have, for every element in your object, you have a tag. It's not a V4. It's basically, well, you could do it like that, but it's not usually. You just have a tag, and it only shows if the element has something in it. So it's really, really easy to, surprisingly easy to build. And that's something, if somebody's interested, we could always make up an example in our workshop. So. Is there any other questions? Actually, I'll do maybe one more here. Rusty says, I found that using data table column searches was better for my organization. Had the modal. They had the modal, but they only wanted column headers. So I guess it's going to be a flavor thing then, Pearson, too, right? So certain people only want to have something that represents Excel if they're always using Excel.
Yeah, that's what it was actually. Yeah, I mean, I built it just like how he's got it, and they're like, "Why you have to do it? Another window, and then I have to press apply." And they just wanted something fast for the data tables with a column. Each column you can do a input and search on it was a lot better for them.
Yeah, I think that's actually similar to something we've been working on with the revamping the helper file, and we asked a couple of you guys, your thoughts on filtering these results within the helper file, and we got some good feedback. And that's a scenario where I wouldn't use this kind of pop-out filter window. I would be more likely to have the filters live updating, or inputting them straight from the screen without having to open up a new window or a modal. I would have them all presented and available right up front.
All right, super. Thanks, Pearson.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to show one more. This is very, very early. This is pre-alpha, I guess you could call it, but it's a new feature that we're incorporating. We're experimenting at the same time as to how it will fit in BetterForms as an app. And then later on, we're going to talk about how we built it so that you can build some similar stuff for FileMaker if you're so inclined. There's a ton of apps that are hitting the market that are basically wrappers around GPT. The API is reasonably easy to use, and although it seems really, really slow lately, but it's really, really easy to use. So you see all these people wrapping it up, and because it's super flexible, you can pretty much add AI to virtually any app. And that may be if you're a consultant going to your clients and saying, hey, we can integrate GPT into your app pretty cheap. And suddenly, if you have some app that naturally does some client communications, a CRM, for example, it's like a no-brainer to do that. You can feed it all the past conversations and jump in, and it can suggest replies and things like that to any level of integration that you want. So we're experimenting with how we can incorporate GPT into BetterForms. And fortunately, because BetterForms is fairly data-oriented, it makes it reasonably easy. So this has about maybe 30 lines of code, and I'll show you them later on. But I want to show you some stuff that we're playing with here. So I have a basic H2 tag here. This is HTML. I got my preview over my side. And we've added I'll make sure there. We've added a small widget, and we built the widget as a component so that we can use the widget in any area of the app. Ideally, we want to be able to use it in the JavaScript editor, in the page editor, even things that have a visual user interface. We can actually still have that new actions editor. We can actually still have the same assistant using that, because underneath it's data, and it's GPT is just going to manipulate the data. So it's really, really flexible that way. So basically, here's how it works. You open it up, and it's just called BF Chat for now, for lack of a better name, or something that's nerdy. And I'm going to say something like make text bold, center, and add some padding. And as I mentioned, the API is really slow. They've been having problems with it, but you can see what it just did here. It added let me just turn this on. Maybe you can see it a little bit better, but it added padding. Oops, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen. It added padding. It centered the text. It made it bold. And let's add another command in here. Hopefully everything's working fine. And make a background blue and text white. And give it a second. And I'll explain some of the things that we've encountered. And if somebody is doing some similar stuff, we'd like to hear about it. This is very, very early. So we're using some messages in here to communicate from the background. And there might be some bugs and things like that. Let's try this again. We'll do this here. We'll do a different one here. This again, hopefully second time's a charm. There we go. And let's also, so you can do quite a few things here. Eventually our goal is to tell it more, and I'll talk about later on, if we got time, I'll talk about how we do the prompting and things like that, so that it already knows about BetterForms. But what we're trying to do is we want, and Russell mentioned this at the beginning of just before we started recording, is he uses GPT, and he says he's using it like an educational tool. And I think that's how I usually use it as well. And we want our integration to BetterForms to basically teach the developers things so that their skills are by using the tool, using the things, their skills are increasing. So we've tried to coax it to have the prompts so that our responses are things like, tell us what you did. Right. So, here's the update, and we've changed this setting here, and the text color is there. And we also made it's not purely transactional in the sense of I don't send the command and it changes the code. So I can ask it other questions here too, because it's actually, we're extracting the code from the response and then using just when it does return something. So I can say, how would I do this, or how can I make that conditional? Eventually, we'll pass in things like the app model and the data model as examples. We can't just just send them, usher them through, because they could be really large. But we will send that more information there. And in some of our tests, I can't demonstrate all of them right now, but in some of our tests where we basically give it the app model and we say, create a contact card, like create a contact card from app.activeContact, and it does a really good job at doing that. You can even do it. You can even do things. Let me just reset it here. Then we have an undo as well. Create a sim marketing splash page. Let's see how we do here. Now, this is going to be a pretty long response, so it's going to take a long time. And again, this is because, unfortunately, OpenAPI has changed their APIs and how they work quite a bit. But we're trying to stay up to speed with the changes that they made to the API, but it tends to be really slow. It's nothing on our behalf, it's on their side. Somebody asked for GPT, how good is the quality of the code? It's excellent. Actually, it's really, really good. It does make mistakes, very similar to a person, but check this out. Look, like that's pretty cool. And in time, we'll tune this so that's pulling your FileMaker data, basically saying, hey, this is the data that we're grabbing. Can you make this look really amazing? And we'll also be able to say things like, take the getting started button and run this named action. And we've also done some really early experiments where we said, here's a bunch of named actions, and this is what they do. And it can actually pick the right one out of it, as long as we tell it enough about the environment. So that's something that we're working on actively, or I'm working on actively, as far as myself and Hassan and our team, where he built this interface and I built the back end. And we hope to have a beta coming out probably in the next release of BetterForms, maybe 3-4 weeks-ish, something like that, or the one after that, maybe about 5-6 weeks. I don't know if anybody has any other questions about that. Jeremy mentioned I've used GPT for formatting and it's nearly perfect. Yeah, it's really, really good for soft stuff like that. Anything that's subjective, if you will. So
I'm curious a bit about how it works. Like, are you adding a paragraph at the beginning that points it at Tailwind? And
we'll take it all apart after later on today.
Oh, okay.
So I'll show you exactly all the code from end to end if you want. But yeah, basically we are tuning the prompt quite a bit. All right, awesome. So I'm going to switch it over, and Andrew, of your group there, who's gonna lead there?
Christina.
Okay. The team that are part of our front end and our development team, I mentioned that we wanted to make this Friday Live about Flexbox, and I just kind of picked something that I thought would be useful for everybody. And then they came back and they actually, in their wisdom, they said, well, why don't we start from the beginning more, and let's look at like kind of a little bit more progressive from end to end, and we'll get into Flexbox at that point. And Flexbox is basically a mechanism for allowing you to create very complex flowing layouts. So I'm going to switch things over to Christina, and she's going to lead us off and fill us in from there.
Yes, for sure. We can work on Flexbox next Friday Live if wanted. If you don't want, we won't do it.
Actually, I think it would be good. So eventually we'll get there.
So we'll be talking about some introductory CSS, that includes margin, padding, and tailwind. So I'm going to start off with the CSS box model because this will help you be a good front-end developer. You can think of HTML elements as boxes. Every single HTML element is a box. And it's super important to think of it like this when you're working with design, layout, and front end. So the CSS box model is a box that wraps around every HTML element. And as you can see from the diagram, we've got content, padding, border, margin. The content is any HTML element that you have. It could be your P tag, your image tag, your H3 tag. And let's say I had a P tag, and inside of my P tag, I had the text hello world. It's going to start right here at this line, and the text will be hello world and fill up as much space as it needs. And then I have padding, border, and margin. The padding is going to be the space in between the content and the border. And the margin is a space between this element and other elements that you have on your page. So this is great for keeping in mind when you're thinking about making the layouts of your page. And what I like to do is right-click and click on Inspect. I use this pointer tool, and we can take a look at this first intro P tag that they've got here. And down here, you can see all the HTML code. And if you click on the right side, the computed, you can see the box model here. And we can see that they have 19.2 pixels of margin, no border, no padding, and the content itself takes up space. Since this is a P tag, it takes up like the entire width that it can. And the margin definitely follows that since it's within its own box. And you can also use this filter tool here, and it confirms that we've got pixels of 19.2. So this was the intro to box model, and I can hand it off to Hassan for a demo.
Yeah, so I'll be demoing basically everything Christina just explained, so you can see that in real time, kind of. So I'll start by sharing my screen. So is it up? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll take an HTML over here. I'll just paste it in and let's hop in here. Oh. Yeah, my browser went sleepy.
Mhm.
All right, let's hop in here. Okay, so I'm gonna add a border over here so everyone can see exactly what's happening. This sticker. And we'll explain what's going on over here with these tailwind classes later, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So right here, we have as Christina was saying in the box model, so it sits inside the border, right, content. And when you apply margin to this, so I'll put margin here, you see that margin goes outside of the border. So it's gonna move everything away. This is mainly used for when you're doing like, you wanna kind of space out paragraphs and text and stuff, so you would use margin. But now what padding does on the other hand is, if I add padding, it's adding it inside the border. So the border is expanding and all the content inside is shifting out. So I'll give you guys two examples of where you guys will probably see this pretty often. And the first one is with a button. So over here, we have a button. Let's call it my button. Oh, and I'll make this a div actually. Okay, so over here, we have a button. And now if I add margin over here, I can kind of move around the button. So this is what I would want to be doing. I didn't see like move around the button, but say I want to make the space inside the button bigger, like it's not enough. Then I could add padding instead. And that would be increasing the widthness of the button. All right, and now another example, which also comes up a lot, is icons. So let's take some random font awesome icon here. And for visibility, we'll add this. So right now, if I hover over this icon, I will get the cursor pointing right when I'm on it. So let's say I add margin to this. By adding margin, it's still the same spot. I'll only be able to click this for clickable actions right when I go on the icon. The surrounding area is not clickable. But now say I want to make it so users have an easier time clicking things. I can add padding instead. And now all the space around it is also clickable. And you guys can get a better visualization of this when I add background color. So this whole background color would be clickable, for example, by adding padding. Whereas if it was margin, by adding margin, the background is still only inside the icon, and that's the only clickable area. And that's all for the margin and padding segment for the Spider Life. And I think Andrew will explain some of the techniques I'm using here from Tailwind.
Right. Thanks, Hassan. So there are a lot of different ways to apply styling to an element. Beverly just wrote in chat there that some browsers apply some defaults towards different tags. But what I really want to get into was kind of different ways to apply styling to an element. One way is to declare a style attribute in the tag and then provide it with a CSS role. This way is a lot. While it's more flexible, it's pretty cumbersome to use compared to kind of the standard method we like to use, which is Tailwind. For example, you can see Hassan there kind of wrote out the CSS role itself in the style tag, which is totally valid if you want to do it this way. But what Hassan was using earlier to apply styling is Tailwind. And what Tailwind is it's a library that you're most likely familiar with by now if you've been using BetterForms. On the surface, Tailwind gives you access to easy to remember and easy to use classes that you can use to apply CSS to your elements. For example, if you want to apply some padding to an element, you can give it, for example, P-1. P for padding and then 1 for the amount. For padding, Tailwind uses increments of 4 pixels as a standard. Yeah, that's pulling it up there. So P-2 would be 8 pixels. Yeah, so -1 is 4 pixels, -2 would be 8 pixels, 3 would be 12, and so on and so forth. You can also use half steps, I think you can see there. So 0.5 and 1.5 would be increments of 2 pixels. This isn't true for every class type. For example, border follows increments of 1 pixel. You can see there. If you have a specific amount of pixels you need to apply to an element, the new versions of Tailwind lets you declare arbitrary values by wrapping the right side of the hyphen with square braces and then specifying the amount of pixels such as, the text 24 pixels, for example. So Tailwind is the method we recommend most developers use to apply styling to their elements. If there are classes or kind of styles that you want to reuse multiple times, that's when we recommend kind of creating classes in your CSS that you can remember and then reuse for multiple different elements of the same type.
Yeah, and I'll just also add that. So if you want to ever see what we have integrated, what you can use, you can just go on tailwindcss.com. And pretty much everything here we can use in our app. And this is basically what we use as developers most of the time as well. So like transitions, if you want to add, you saw it live with Charles when he was showing the what's called the AI assistant. There was a transition on how things are opening and closing. And yeah, there's a bunch of different things you can play around with. Anything you can do in CSS, you can pretty much do with Tailwind. And it just makes it a lot easier as a developer.
Cool. I think that wraps up that little segment.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Does anybody have any questions at all?
No, I just wanted to say that was excellent because that seems to be the biggest question is what is happening with the CSS, and then, how does Tailwind apply to that? So that was really good.
Tailwind is a utility, they call it a utility CSS library. So all the classes have no opinion. They're all just like little tiny fragments, almost like atomic particles kind of thing. But there are other libraries that you can use with BetterForms, but you don't have to use Tailwind. And there might be something in the future that comes out that's a different approach. Tailwind is taking sort of the whole market by storm that way, because over the past 5 years, they've really have a big industry usage. But there are other libraries that are very similar or have a slight opinion: Bootstrap, Bulma, Google has one, a variation. There's a whole whack of these CSS libraries, and you don't have to, by any means. Again, you don't have to use Tailwind, but I've noticed that it's probably the easiest for people to really wrap their heads around and get advanced access to CSS. Because if you have to start getting into the whole concept of all the query selectors that CSS does, with the angle braces and the parent and the first child and all of this kind of crazy stuff, it becomes a real nightmare. And, that's like a whole other industry almost. You have a specialist, a CSS specialist just for that, but you don't need to anymore, because we can just put the stuff right at the element. Some of the purists will say, well, if I use Tailwind, I'm adding all of these classes all over, and I should be abstracting that all the way out to my CSS file. But in actuality, the actual size of the files actually remain about the same when they, at the end of the day, when they look at a whole bunch of GitHub commits that are using Tailwind. And the main reason for that is when you go on and use CSS, you don't know what the other developer has added, because they've added some crazy thing to target some weird element because they couldn't reach it. So they add another one underneath. They add another CSS selector, and then you end up with 2 and 3 and 4 of these things that are all overlapping each other, and it becomes unless you're super anal with maintaining your CSS, it becomes a real nightmare. All right.
Charles,
go
Charles,
ahead.
I have a question on that. What are your best practices for keeping things consistent? That's my biggest issue when I use Tailwind, is elements from one page that I may have designed 6 months ago, and now I'm doing another page, trying to remember how I styled things to be consistent. How do you guys, what's your best practice for that?
Christina actually could probably answer that the best if you could. A couple Friday lives, maybe about 6 or 7 or 8 ago, Christina did a demo on where you can abstract a lot of Tailwind styles. So for example, past someone, he demonstrated he was typing button pry. That's a button class that we've used, but it's not a CSS class. It's just a button class. And in that button class, we've defined a whole bunch of Tailwind styles to define that button, so we can globally change those really easily. I'll see if I can find the link.
Yeah, and I remember that Friday Live. What's the difference? Explain to me what's the difference of that versus more traditional styling and the CSS.
So more traditional styling would have like padding colon, like in a CSS page, it's a padding colon 2052, right? Top, left, right, top, bottom, or top, right, left, bottom. I don't even know which way it is anymore, where to start. But anyway, it goes around the box, and that stuff becomes really cumbersome. It's harder to read, whereas just padding PT-2 implies that it's a padding top. It's a little bit more easier to define. So the classes, you're basically defining, you're creating you're getting the advantage of an abstracted or a removed style, common shared style, like a CSS class would be, but you're basically attaching it to a Tailwind substylings in there. Perfect. So it makes it just a bit easier.
Think of custom function.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of functions into one, and you're just calling that custom function.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of rewriting the whole bit, I guess.
Great. Thank you.
Also, what we've been doing as a team, we've had some sort of naming convention. So with our @apply Tailwind classes, we would name our buttons as BTN-primary or BTN-danger. And you can do that with anything. If you have headings, you can do heading H1. So you create your own, you can namespace them, and that definitely helps you to remember when you go back and look at your add apply classes.
I think colors are the one I use the most to make sure the color remains consistent. So we have like a text pry, background pry, secondary ones as well, come in handy as well.
I noticed Neil Manchester was on the call. Is he still on? Yeah. I'm not sure if you're busy, Neil, but Neil's done a lot of playing around with styles, probably the most of anybody I know, and bringing styles and kind of unifying them across and being able to actually create themes and using CSS variables, which are a whole other world as well. Perhaps
that's what allowed me to do that, Charles, creating the Tailwind classes, the apply classes in the DOM header under your settings, and then using rather than where you've got like a red 600 for Tailwind red, I've changed that to a theme 600, and then it's just a case of updating the CSS in the styling in part of a global script, and that then gives you the full access to the whole Tailwind array of colors if people want to change the theme of their app.
Right.
I think I did a blog on it on the forum if anyone wants to know how that's done.
Yeah, if you could drop a link, that would be great, and then we'll throw it in
I'll find
our
that.
notes as well. Thank you.
No,
Would you say it was a big investment? I mean, for your use case, it totally makes sense. If you're building a quick app for a client, just bang it out quick, might be a better solution.
Yeah, I think for if you're doing a vertical market solution, it's probably worth it if you've got a lot of clients that want to be able to brand, particularly if they've got a front end element of it as well. So if they're embedding, like I've got a booking widget as part of the app, so it allows clients to select a color that's going to match their website. So if they embed the BetterForms page that loads the booking widget in an iframe on their website, they're not stuck with a blue or a green or whatever that I've picked. They can just pick from that sort of array of colors that Tailwind offer. And once we'd worked out how to do it, it's actually not that big a undertaking. And then it's just a case, rather than, and anywhere I reference the color, then just like Andrew said, with a primary, I've just got a text theme 600 rather than text red 600, and it just picks up whatever the theme is that the company's picked.
Yeah, some companies are really particular, their websites, especially if you've got things like this that are linked. Here's my main website, then here's what we've got, published through FileMaker or whatever. And so you have to match logos and colors and font sizes and like that. And sometimes they're pretty good about telling you what it needs to be, and other times you just have to go into that little dialogue, little console, and say, well, what font did they use, and kind of make your own mapping. But once you do, it's used everywhere. So, and then they're happy, and they pay you big bucks to do it.
I've actually taken it one step further with one company who, again, exactly what you said there, Beverly, had got like their hex color for what their theme is. There's found a website that when you put that hex in will create a kind of Tailwind 50 to 900 set of colors. So then all it's a case of doing then is in the script I've got that runs when they change theme. There's just an option at the bottom that calls it by, rather than a like a green or a red or an amber or whatever is Tailwind. I've just called it their business name. So it just picks that color up, and then it again just goes across the whole app then.
Yeah, very cool.
Jeroen asked, to support good UI, people have been building grids in FileMaker to promote consistency. Is there a standard grid that is currently available under the hood, or should we implement our own? Yes and no. There's kind of I don't want to say it's a trick question. There's a thing called CSS grids, but I think what you're really looking for in Jeroen is basically how do you line stuff up? Fortunately, the web has a really good mechanisms for lining stuff up. And that's actually where we're eventually going to go with maybe this series over the next Friday lives, is we have things like Flexbox, which will automatically align all the contents. So they'll all be like the same, you know, you got father and son and kids and everybody's all different heights kind of thing, or my fingers in your hand. Flexbox makes those all the same height, and one can be more greedy than the other and things like that. So it's really good. We also have CSS Grid, which here, let me just jump to my screen here. I used our chat bot. I said, create a 3x3 grid. I even had a typo in it. It's really, GPT is great for me. And it created a grid with random colors. So CSS Grid allows you, and I'm using this in an HTML element, but you can bring this up to a higher level to a regular BetterForms element. So you can put all kinds of other stuff inside each one of these boxes, but it allows you to create layouts that can flow and flex. Typically speaking, in FileMaker, we don't have any really true responsiveness. That means the page does not change its fundamental shape with when the overall window changes, or at least one element can, but not all the elements, or they all change linearly. So with things like Flexbox, let me just undo this here and do another one. Create a responsive 3x3 grid. Let me try that one there. And so let me move this over a little bit here. And I can't wait for the API to be a little bit faster. There are a few other APIs, and we'll get into those in a few seconds here, looking at some of the stuff and how we can play with it. But CSS Grid is just one way, and it's I don't want to say it's a newer way, but it's kind of newer now compared to some really old ways of making stuff line up. For the most part, if you want to get pieces to line up, you sort of have this, in BetterForms, we have this idea of groups. Groups are really just divs under the hood, but you can put stuff into groups, and then you can have all the items that are in those groups line up. I think when we keep going forward on this, we'll look at how that works. But here's an example of a responsive layout where it's it looks like it's kind of a wonky one. It's 3 wide here, and then it goes to 2. And then it goes to 3 smaller ones. And I don't think that's quite the effect that there's an example of GPT actually making something maybe that's less than ideal. I could specify that on a small screen. I want it to maybe go to 1, but you can see how this actually changes, and then your content would fill those boxes, right?
It's a feature, really not a bug.
Yeah, that's right. Because then it's a smaller one, right? These are full-size images. These are thumbnails. So it goes to the thumbnail view, which happens to be 3x3. It's all how you describe the features. Neil just posted in the chat a link to the to adding how he added those themes. So those are a few ways. Look for that in an upcoming Friday live, and we can certainly add some stuff, and we'll create some templates that you can even start off with. We have a few, like a master detail and a couple other ones that are simple, but maybe we can create some empty shell pages with just some minimal fields, and then you can get a really good idea. And it's on how that would work. All right. Any other questions on the CSS layout related stuff? Okay. What I wanted to do is I wanted to go, and I'll show you, I'm not a GPT total expert by any means. I'm pretty novice, I think, but I'll show you the stuff that I've discovered, and I want to share that. And if anybody's been doing any integrations, I'd like to hear some of their findings as well. I wanted to start off with looking at OpenAI's, I had it open here, OpenAI's API, and they're just their documentation and their API here. This one here, it's close enough. Nope. There we go. Yeah, that's close enough. Okay. So I can't believe they have such an ugly site. So if we go into developers in here and into the documentation, there's 2 parts of the documentation, the main docs, and then there is the API reference. So this one gives you an overview of everything. Fundamentally, I'm going to do kind of a speed integration thing here, and I'll slow down when we get into the FileMaker related stuff, because you can read all of this stuff. But for the most part, they have different models. The models are basically the different engines for their AI. Some of the models have been deprecated. The one we were originally using for our code is called Codex. It was a specially trained one that it was trained on just on GitHub's commits. And interestingly enough, it knows a little bit about FileMaker. And he said, well, how is that possible if it's trained on GitHub commits? But there's enough people who have committed, I guess, just lines of FileMaker, or it's integrated some other stuff in there as well. But there's a little bit in there anyway. Some of it is hallucination though with the FileMaker code, and we talked about that last month, I think, or 2 months ago. So this one has been deprecated. They gave everybody 3 days notice, and then they deprecated it. But then there's such pushback that they brought it back again. But they're actually recommending using, for the most of the APIs, the GPT 3.5 Turbo or 3.5 model. And some of these other models that they have in here, if we jump into this one here, there's some variations of it. And some of these other models are really good at doing other types of stuff. Most of the stuff that you're going to use GPT for, if it's things like, we have a product that we're working on, it's edits film scripts. And those film scripts, it doesn't actually need full GPT. It needs really one of these like lighter models that are really good for parsing just certain types of data. And it works just fine for that. They're way faster and they're way cheaper. They recently came out with GPT-4, which has an increased token limit. Tokens are basically, you can think of them almost like syllables. And the more tokens that it can process, the bigger chunk of data it's going to cost you proportionally. It's cost so much per token. This is really inexpensive, in all honesty, for what you're getting from a business aspect. It's relatively cheap, but you are using significant CPU power, I guess, to process this stuff. So that's where the cost comes in. The new GPT-4, there's one variation, I think it's up to 32K tokens, which is like pretty extensive. That's huge amounts of data that you can feed into it. And I would imagine in another half a year, you're going to see that even increase even more. All right, so these are the different models. I just want to look at really quick at what the API looks like as well. And it's really, really simple to communicate. It's basic authentication. And so basically, if you've done integrated with any other apps, it's almost exactly the same. Here's a typical curl request. You can copy this into the, I don't even know if anybody's using it anymore, but Geist had a piece of code called generator. And at one time I wrote the parser that parses this thing out and turns it into an actual real request in FileMaker, into a JSON object, then into a real request. But I'm not sure if anybody's using it, but these are really easy to create now, right? This kind of stuff, so it's pretty simple. And let's jump into making the actual calls. I'm going to use the chat API here. And for the most part, here's what you do. You send it a chunk of data, right? So you're sending it a chunk of data, and here's what it looks like here, where I have the model that I want to send it to. So that's one of those models that we looked at earlier on. And then I have a messages array. And the messages array is basically, if you think of a chat going left and right, and somebody talking like this one, where to go here? Oh, and let's go to here. Actually, I don't have chat on this one. I have to go back to this one here. All right. So if you think about this data, left side, right side, those are really just entries in an array. Each entry is an object, and each side has a role. One side is the assistant, one side is the user. There's 3 roles in their API. There is an assistant, a user, and a system role. And the system is where you can give it supposedly overarching or overlaying instructions that it will listen to. It turns out that GPT doesn't really listen to the system instruction very well. It listens to the user more than it listens to the most recent stuff a little bit more than the earlier stuff. It's, you can kind of steer it a little bit, much like a human, I guess, to some degree. But that's basically it. So in this case, they have a role as a user, and the content is the other key. And that inside that content, you put things like hello or what the instructions are. So the way we built this, and I'll just take this thing apart. I'm going to use this computer unless it crashes really bad. I apologize. But the way we built this is really simple. Basically, we started off with a default prompt. Now, this prompt is not getting sent to GPT, but we wanted something that faces the Pearson. When he designed this, he said, I want a little bit of instruction in there that tells the user what to do. So we actually strip this prompt out later on, but this becomes part of an object. And when I give this an instruction, it creates another entry into that array. So now I have this array of messages, and eventually this messages array gets fairly long. So then we jump over to FileMaker, and give me a quick second here to do that. I'm just going to pause my screen for a quick second. I'm just going to open up some things here and into some scripts here. Okay. All right. All right. So then we jump over to FileMaker. So basically what's happening is when I hit enter here in BetterForms, I'm not going to go into the BetterForms code too much unless somebody asks, but all I'm doing is I'm sending to the back end a small object that consists of just that array. Right. And I'm actually sending the whole history of the conversation. We're not storing it on the server or anything like that, because this is stuff that only if the user decides to save that we would save. But there's no reason to put it into any data in the database. So I'm sending that to the back end here. And basically what I'm doing, and there's two parts of code. I've switched around this, but so you can ignore these first few lines, but I'm grabbing the parameters. This is just doing the same thing, but it's running it on server. But I'm grabbing the parameters and I'm breaking some of the parameters out. And the main one is my instruction. And I'm grabbing the data model and the app model from the front end, because the user has some kind of development data and app. And I'm grabbing the array of messages. So that's a JSON array. From here, I'm merging the data into a template. And Jason, I think it was, who was asking, well, how do we wrap this around? How do we take a prompt that the user could put anything in? You know, you could ask for a recipe in here, and how do we guide it to giving the results that we want? So what we do is we sort of engineer a prompt, and I'll show you what some of our earlier prompts look like. Just a second here. And let's do this here. And the tuning of the prompt is really, really critical. We don't need to, just a second here. Okay. There we go. I think it's in here. Let me just make sure. All right. So here is an example of a prompt that we use. Now, I mentioned this is written not in left side, right side, kind of like an array, JSON array, but it's written more linearly, so I can experiment with it, and then we just put it into the database. So we're not actually using a system prompt in this particular one here. This is an older one, but now we do. But basically, the system prompt would be something like, you are an assistant, or you are very helpful, or you are this or that, an expert at legal matters, and that kind of thing. And that kind of pre-biases the engine. It gets it kind of pointing in the right direction, I guess you could say, from a vector aspect. And then here, basically, we're saying, you are an HTML coding assistant working on the code that will go into an app builder SaaS that uses Tailwind CSS for styling and Vue.js for dynamic code injection. Now, the reason we said some of these things is because we want to tell GPT a little bit, and we're experimented a lot, but we want to tell GPT about who the user is a little bit. So that helps kind of guide the output more. The code will be injected into a Vue template as dynamic code, and there's some redundancy in here, and you have access to regular Vue directives. That tells it that what it can do and what it can't do. We don't want the code coming back and dumping a bunch of raw Vue, because BetterForms takes care of all of that heavy lifting. You don't have to do all of that stuff. So we want to strip out all of that. There are two variables available, model and app. And your task is to create, and then the task the task is merged into this template here. So your task is to create a card with a round avatar that has a shadow and a border with when you hover over it, right? Please provide HTML code embedded into a JSON object. If any explanation comments are needed, add those comments to a comments key. Don't forget to escape the HTML, because it does forget, as it's embedded into a JSON object. So originally we tried to make the API return JSON, which it can reasonably do, right? So we gave it, here's an example, model variable contains this, and app variable contains this. This is the one we use to tune the prompt. And then we gave it an example response. You notice the response is not escaped like a code block here, because this is just marked down underneath in Notion here. And the reason for that is we don't want the response to actually be escaped, and it's going to mimic exactly that. So we said HTML and comment, and we even have to escape this, because if we don't escape it, it comes back JSON-like, but not real JSON. So the little things like that really do make a big difference. And then we say, here's the current HTML. That's the piece that we send from the front end. Please provide the JSON response containing the modified HTML. Now, originally, the API responds and it says, sure, here's your response. Well, the sure is no good because it's not part of it's not part of code. The old model, that Codex model, the one that got deprecated, returns real code. You give it code, you say what you want, and it just returns a new thing. So it's really good like that. It doesn't return any chatter. But this model here, the one they recommend, it does. So in order to make sure that it returns JSON, what we did is we added this right at the end. And you say, well, that's kind of weird, but if you understand how these things work, they work on like a continuation, right? So it predicts what's next. If you go into ChatGPT and you go 1, 2, 3, it'll go 4, 5, 6, right? If you go 2, 4, 6, 8, it'll go, 10, 12, 14, 16 kind of thing. If you turn up the variation, the temperature was one of the settings, you can go 2, 4, 6, 8, and it'll say, who do we appreciate? Because that's also a valid ending for that completion, for that phrase of text. So by giving it a little bit of a prompt, the continuation of this becomes JSON. And that actually was a little tiny thing there. So here's how we merge the prompts. And this is a real simple technique that we've talked about before. And some people already do this kind of thing already. But basically we have a template. And the way we get the template is we have a generic data store. And if you're not already doing this, you should have. I can't see an app not having this, any kind of big app. Basically, a generic data store is just a table that has data. It has an ID of an owner key and maybe some notes of what's in there. The data can be anything you want in here. And this is some of the data that we use in BetterForms. Here's some text. I'm just grabbing a random record, but this is just some random markdown that goes into a helper file when it comes time for it to upgrade, right? Where does that text sit, right? We don't want to create a table for that. So this is just a generic table. Let's see. Here's a bunch of tags. When you create a new page in BetterForms, there's a bunch of tags to describe the tags. And this is just a JSON object in here. And that's where that data comes from. So I'm just going to jump up to our prompt. And here is a prompt. Let me just make this a little larger so we can see it. And it's just basically, we're just using some characters to wrap in the merge tags. And then we've changed the prompt. Now it says you are a brief coding assistant. We're finding it's too chatty when it comes back. It's sending too much stuff. So we got to say it's brief. All right. Always use Tailwind. We used to have it use Tailwind for styling, but then it was prompting the user to maybe, should I use Tailwind? Should I not? If you want to use it, here's something else. And it was too wishy-washy. So we said always, just very little subtle things like that. Use Vue.js as needed. But basically, that's the prompt there, right? And then we gave an example response. So we've changed the way the response goes. And now we escape this response with backticks, which is something that it does a little bit more naturally anyway. And then explain what you did, kind of thing. And then what we do on the front end is we parse out those backticks and we take the code that's inside them and we put that into the editor. So we fetch this here. The way we can fetch this, is anybody not familiar with this technique of a generic data store in a table?
I call that EAV.
What does
I'm
EAV
not-
stand for?
I'm not familiar with that.
Entity attribute value.
Yeah. It's a key value pair. Okay. So
Yeah.
somebody said they weren't. So all it is a really simple table, just a dumb table. And it's got literally, I don't even need this container field. There was some more of a cruft in there. It has forget about this ID because everything has an ID. So that's gone. You have an ID owner, right? And this owner is really whatever you want to identify this particular record with. right? And it can be multiple records because you can have multiple records that an owner could have, maybe even. So it's any data structure you want, and just some data. The data does not have to be JSON. It can be anything that you want in there. And then when you want to fetch that data, so when I want to fetch this, and you can use, this could be JavaScript that's going into a web viewer, for example. You can do the same thing. And when I want to fetch that data, I'm going to find it based on this ID. My ID in this case is called assistant prompt underscore HTML, and there's another one, assistant prompt JSON. All right. So when I want to find that, let me just open up my data viewer here. Is I'm basically going to fetch it using execute SQL. And I am terrible at execute SQL, unlike Beverly, who kind of knows some stuff in there. But fortunately, there's a whole bunch of people that made some great custom functions, and we have one built into BetterForms called getColumn. And I want to fetch from my data store table. What is it called? A miscellaneous data store. I want to fetch out of there. I want to fetch the data when the ID owner equals, did I get this right? Get column generate. Nope, got some bug in here. There. I want to fetch this. This is basically a SQL wrapper. So it returns this when that equals that. That's it. So it's select data where ID owner equals this string here. And then it just pops my data back, right? Where you can use this in BetterForms, some people use it for optimization. You got something that's really slow, a really deep, giant JSON object that changes now and then, and you don't want to recalculate it every time somebody needs it. Is you can calculate it once and stick it in this field in here. It doesn't really matter too much within reason about size. And then you can just fetch it with one line of code there. This could be JSON, it could be text or markdown as it is in this case. So that's how that works. And then finally, we basically take that result and we are just doing a simple substitution on it, right? Just exactly, we're substituting the values of those items with the values that we want. And then I end up substituting out that first message because that first message it's not really applicable to what we're doing. And then I take that data, we'll call it message merged. I am calling a subscript. This is just broken down with this is just a connector part, just the API connector. It has no opinion as to how it's being used. And when I call that subscript, that is basically calling one more script underneath, which is the HTTP request. All of this script here is doing is it's wrapping up, it's grabbing our preferences key and some other things like that. It's wrapping that up and sending it out, error trapping it only. So it's not really doing too much there. And that's how the whole thing works. So it's pretty simple integration, I think. Any questions on that at all? Oops, this is the wrong thing.
Charles, not to interrupt, but do you have the names for the swag draw?
Pardon me? Sorry?
Do you have the names for the swag draw?
Yeah, they should be in the document there. I think I pasted them in.
Okay.
Right.
Charles, did you have like a rough idea of what it costs to run the types of requests that you're running?
Yeah, I can tell you just a second here. Just wait till my computer dewigs. The OpenAPI control panel has a playground, and they also have. So this is another you can play around with tuning prompts, but in this playground there is a section on manage account, and manage account basically shows that I've used 8 cents today. Right. So for us, practically, it might cost $1 or $2 a day if everybody was really pounding it. Right. Which is pretty cheap for the ability that it gives us. Right. $300 a year, maybe something like that. That's a really crude guess. You can see I did some stuff a couple of days ago that was 20 cents worth. So the monetization is by tokens, and there's a cost depending on the model. Each model works differently. And let me see if I can find the pricing. Maybe billing? No. It might be in the documentation. Pardon me, you saw it? Where?
Yeah, right at the orange.
Oh, right there. Thank you. Ugh. I like the orange icon goes to the green page. And here we are. So GPT-3, which is what we're using, is 0.2 cents. So it's 1 penny per 5K tokens, basically.
So
it's
a request can be up to 1,000 tokens, but like, what is a typical request of the type that you're using? Is it
sure. We're sending in our use case, we're sending all of this plus this right now, right? And this could be several K big. This could be quite large. So that's going to be effectively poses a problem. So we'll probably add some kind of token counter into the front end that basically says select a smaller chunk of text, something along those lines. The other thing too is you could have some development data in your model here. This is food pet. You could have some development data in here that's really, really large. And in fact, the thing that you're actually wanting to do work on may not even be very big, but the other keys in here are really, really large. So we're trying to, think of how can we reduce that data? But it is really nice to tell GPT what data is in there. So maybe we just give it the keys.
Yeah, I was just thinking you probably don't need the values.
Not so much. It's the key names, the variable names. So, so that's one thing we could do, and that significantly reduces the size. And what's neat is you don't have to supply it valid JSON. You can literally say to GTP, various keys here, and it gets that.
Yeah.
You could say various keys here like name first, and it gets that kind of stuff, right? So it doesn't have to be super valid JSON for supplying it. It understands the concepts there, which is pretty cool. I think that concludes that, unless anybody wants to learn about any more. This is our development server here. I'll just mention a couple other quick things. The playground is pretty good, and we built our own playground for doing different types of testing as well. The playground is basically allows you to experiment with different models. So here's our actual system prompt, so that I can treat it the same. One thing I've noticed is the playground is supposed to be connected to the API exactly the same, but when I run code from the API and I run identical prompts from the playground, they don't always come out the same. And I don't know why that is, but clearly they're not the same thing. Maybe the back end, the way it's connected or something like that is slightly different or whatever. But you can basically pick your different models here. Actually, this is the modes, I should say. So the chat mode is when you're sending data back and forth. Insert is if you have a big series of paragraph and you want to replace one section. Like that would be something like if I had some kind of a word processor and I just wanted to go like this and say, hey, change this wording. You could do something like that. That's what this insert one is. And the edit one is takes the initial text and it edits the whole thing. So that's more like if you're going to format a letter or something along those lines. The temperature is the degree of variation. We're returning primarily code, so we want it very predictable, deterministic, but this is much more random. They say this at 50% will explore 50% of the options, something like that, of what comes back. So that's the randomness here. I'm not a data scientist, so I don't really totally get what top P is, but basically it's the likelihood distribution of the weights of whatever, I don't know. And same thing down here, but for our use case, everything is more or less set to zeros.
We had a question about FileMaker 2023.
Oh yeah, that's some good stuff in there. Let me just pull up a document that I had. I'll tell you it's the stuff and how it affects us as BetterForms developers. Eduardo, you just sent me, I don't know if he's in here, but he just sent me this. Somebody just sent me the link.
It's up
It's
there.
don't read our stuff, guys. It's all right. So FileMaker just released 2023, and the biggest things that affect us, there's two things that potentially are of interest, I think, that I can see. There's perform script on server with callback is one of them. And the reason why that one's interesting is it allows you to basically create threads. So if you have some kind of really intensive process, you can spin off variations of your text. I'm going to just go in here. I think I will do something new. Let's do it here. So you could be running a script, and your script is running along, and normally you call some API, or let's say you're going to send 50 emails or do whatever it is, whatever is generated report or something like that. And then that has to come back to here, and then it continues with the next step. Perform script with callback basically is perform script on server, don't wait, but run a script at the end of the day. And I think that's more useful for front end stuff, really. But I think where it might be interesting to us is if we have some kind of thing that's really intensive processing, and we want to tell the front end, or we want to tell, it's not a BetterForms thing. I think it has more useful for just the back-end processes, that I think, from what I can see so far. And that's when we want to, in our case, we do run some heavy lifting in the back end in our server, mostly related to our development operations. Like when you go and create a new environment, there's a ton of crap that has to happen underneath the hood. We create the environment and all of that stuff, and we have to hydrate a template, and then we have to create the domain. We have to get a certificate. We have to attach that certificate. Once that's done, we have to send it to all the data centers in a programmatic fashion. And then we have to maintain those certificates, so that we also have to check all of those things. So about a month before they're due. And there's a whole bunch of these background processes. Some of the processes would be nice to be able to run stuff in parallel, to spin up things in parallel. And I think that's the biggest advantage there. The other thing is more interesting though to us, and that is the feature where you can create audit logs. And I'm going to jump to my laptop here, because I have it's not exactly a demo, but it's sort of like a demo. Quick into this meeting here. So jump into here. Give me just a quick second here. And here. Has anybody had a chance to play with this yet?
I played just a little bit with Beeswax made a file available that does a whole lot of automated stuff with the field, the on-window transaction field.
Sure.
To automatically insert all of your stored fields into it.
Yeah, so let me just pull it up here. I'm not sure the icon. I'm not fully understanding the icon. But let me just see if I can pull this up here quick. And this is just a very simple. Yeah, I'll just go here. Okay, so I have a very simple file here. And let me just talk about what this does. Basically, it allows us to create a script trigger on any transaction in the database. Everybody's talking about audit logs, right? Oh, great, we can create audit logs, which is a real pain, right? But I think a way more important value is the fact that now FileMaker can do what's called broadcasting. Broadcasting is when what a lot of other databases, most databases can do, is basically run an event and say this thing has changed in the database. That allows you to send that information, that change, the diff, to another database in some fashion or some other code. That other code in our case is BetterForms, and or at least the network. And we're also interested in it because that allows you to create things like synchronization synchronizations and engines and such. So here is, it's really, it's super simple to implement. And I think they did a pretty good job for the most part. There's a couple weird things that I don't fully get. If we go into file options and we say into scripts and we turn on, I don't know if we can see that very well right there, on window transaction. And we specify a script. I have a script called on window transaction as well. And that script effectively runs every time something happens. So over here, let's have a look at what's in that script, what I got in there for now. Okay, so what's happening in here is doesn't matter. I am just exiting. Okay, this is kind of important here. I'm exiting the script and this is really cheap, just quick and dirty. This is not the best way to do this. Don't do this way, but I'm basically just looking to make sure that it's not that this particular table is the one that caused the transaction. Otherwise I get a cyclic dependency there. So I'm basically grabbing the results here. Let's just do a show custom dialog with those results. And I'm also going to a layout, creating a new record, setting the field, committing the record, and then going back to the original layout. Right. And that's it. So that's running here. This is all running locally on my machine. And let's close that. Let's do this, clear this out. And when we have a new record, command new. So I've created a new record, haven't committed it. I'm going to hit there. As soon as I clicked off the field, it started to commit the record. And you can see it passed a few things. It passed the file name, it passed the ID, sorry, the table. And then this is the weird thing here is it passed an array of strings where one of the strings, this one here, can be your passed in parameter. So it's weird that this is not an object with a key and a value. I don't really understand the logic in that. And I think it should have been, because it's been way more, it's way more deterministic when you're parsing it. But basically the operation is new. This record is the 6900 record that's been created roughly. And then this is just passed in from a calculation. And this is the thing that it's basically what you're doing is you're passing in a copy of your as.json of your table. Right. I noticed that most of the demos, or at least the two demos that I saw, especially the one in the documents, they're dumping the entire record, basically every field that's in the record into the audit log, which I think is kind of silly. I think you should just have the differences, the things that changed. And you can filter that out easily. But that's basically the way it works. Right now, for FileMaker, sorry, for BetterForms, what that allows us to do is BetterForms already has built-in messaging. Messaging, it uses sockets protocol over the browser, and basically you do an API call to your site, to your domain, with your own API key. The API key can be found in the API key is found in the editor under the app settings, and we have some documentation on how to use this as well. And you basically send a message, and you can create channels. You can assign users to channels. The channels can be they can be anonymous channels. That means the user doesn't have to be logged in, or you can have more security, and they can be authenticated channels. And it allows you to basically send in messages, and it uses BetterForms actions processor, app, and data models. By using the actions processor, that means you can just create actions like you normally do in front end, and then you can send them to a message, and then the user's device just responds to it, assuming that they're connected. So if you can do that, that means that every time you make a change to some data, you could send out a data object. This is a unique ID, universally unique ID. You could send that out to all your connected apps, or at least all your connected users, or the ones that have interest in, and you can say ID BBCE changed, and the first name changed, or the status went to active, like this, and that message, effectively a little different shape, would get sent out to the network, and it updates everybody's app instantly. So we'll have some examples for this probably by the next Friday live, but basically BetterForms just went 100% live with almost no work on your behalf. This is something that we were looking at hacking our way into being able to do. But this came along and this is like a major game changer. It's a real big bonus for us. Any questions on that at all? I don't know if I explained it very well.
Will that still then need to work with the app model sync? So the update gets pushed into app, and then because your page is working with,
Exactly. So you push the updates. Generally, the concept is we push the data. I think I have a drawing. Let me just see if I can find a drawing of this. Basically, the idea is, I'm going to stop my share here and switch computers here. Is we syncing strategies. Let's see. I think it's in here. Okay, just give me a sec to find the right drawing here. May not have it in here. Okay, this is sort of, okay, this kind of is like this. Let me go to this one here. Yeah, here we go. So basically, user A makes a change in the database. Now, this could be a FileMaker client. It could be a BetterForms app. It doesn't really matter. It could be a third-party webhook calling in and making some change to the data. The record gets committed. Now, the way we have to do this now, and the BetterForms editor does this, that's how we get the collaboration effect, is as soon as we hit save, we have to explicitly say, oh, this record saved. Let me run this extra routine. We'll spin it off as in a separate perform script on server thread, so the user doesn't have to wait for it. Let me send a message out to everybody who's connected to that particular app. So in BetterForms, you click into an app, you go into it, you see all your environments. Let me send a message out to everybody in that, just into that group. We don't want to send it to everybody who's connected to the editor in general. And we send out basically the change. It's an ID of the entity, so it's some kind of primary key and then some kind of data. That goes into our servers, that automatically goes to all of our data centers. They're all connected through a database that connects them at a lower level. And then it sends out to every device that's connected that matches that domain and matches that channel. That data then ends up inside your application. So that's your other user. We would normally, it's a better practice to send that data into the app model than into the page model, because you don't really know what page they're on. And if you send the data into the global model, then it doesn't matter which page that they're on, that updates, and then from there, when they go back to that page, we already have the data from them. This is the updated data. So this is turning out to be a pretty good design pattern. I think I might have talked about it once before too. Sometimes they call it not flux design pattern. And it's basically when you make a mutate something here, it goes up and it comes all the way back down again. It's that circular kind of a thing.
And it's going to be even better when AppSync comes along, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So AppSync is a feature that it is available now, but Neil actually discovered some peculiarities with it, and they've been fairly challenging to fix, but we're almost there. We're almost there, Neil. Basically, AppSync just synchronizes your page with the data in the global variable. So as soon as you go back to that page, you have the data there. It allows you to build apps that you go from page to page to page, and you don't have to think about the data in the page. It's all kind of global. Yet the page still kind of responds as if it's a locally scoped piece of data. So that's something that's a relatively new feature, but we haven't promoted it a lot because it's still kind of beta-ish. I'm going to stop my share here. Has anybody used or has anybody got any killer use cases for this version 2023? maybe some UI things or whatever else is in there?
The other big thing that I'm excited about is the support for ARM processors on Ubuntu.
So what will that do? Is that just cheaper servers then for you?
Yeah, cheaper and faster, and it's more environmentally friendly as well, less energy consumed. So I use AWS for everything, so that's the T4G class. But it also means if you have a Mac, it means you can run a
Right.
you can run Linux in a container or a virtual machine or something.
I think there was some other changes in.
Can I make a question?
Yeah.
Hi everybody. So about the server, I have a very interesting question and argument with Fabio Bosisio, and he's on his side, on my side. What do you think that is better, an ARM
We think
or a
he's
Mac?
right.
Yeah, thank you. I know that, but I know. He stayed yesterday. He stayed, I think, 2 days working with a $150 server Raspberry with 4 megabyte, making some tests. And I asked him, but why you do that? To testing. Okay, you have time to lose. No, I don't have, but it's okay. Anyway, what do you think that is better for a server? A Mac Mini? M1, Mac Mini Pro, Mac Mini, 16 gigabyte of RAM, 32 gigabyte. Because William and Fabio, we are all on ARM, on Ubuntu. Because I'm passionate and I prefer to have a Ferrari, also if I use half. Because for $400 a year, maybe it's better to have a Ferrari that you have, but when you need it, you have it. Then buy a little smart that if you want to make something more, you need to spend or change environment, everything like this. But I think that I agree with him that probably the new server, also the 2023, don't use 100% M1 or M2 processor, correct? So here I have probably 30 people that we are passionate with performance. We are there spending days for 2 seconds here, half second over there in some script. So I would like that to have a result of is a good audience to have a right answer for me to confirm or to change my idea.
So if I'm understanding correct, you're basically asking what is the best Mac machine, and should you have
maybe a Ubuntu machine is better than a Mac machine,
and should you have should you have your own server versus a cloud server? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm XBA. I have some server in Mac Mini, and I'm very happy about that. I want to upgrade that, and now I'm finding with Fabio. They say, no, you don't need to stay in the Mac Mini. It's better if you go in Ubuntu. But they say, okay, but the Ubuntu sometimes don't use some ODBC, some special feature you cannot handle in the same way that you can do with the Mac.
I don't think you need any connector for the Ubuntu ODBC. I think Mark, I don't know if he's still on here, but he just switched over last week. Mark,
but now I'm speaking only about performance. So performance speaking, if you need to buy a Ferrari for our FileMaker server, what is the Ferrari that we have now?
There's too many variables.
Yeah.
Okay, I know.
You have to test it to know.
I know.
And Wim has done a lot of testing on the different platforms, and he has many different tests, and you can see that some things will perform better on an identically configured Windows machine, and others will perform better on an identically configured Ubuntu machine. So it's all at the end of the day, you don't know until you test your system on those machines. And I don't know that he's tested Macs because he can't spin them up on AWS. So that's a whole other question.
Okay, but your experience, there is different from M2 Pro and M1 server, or keep is the same?
It would depend on whether your app is if processor is the bottleneck. very often with databases, it's disk IO that is the bottleneck.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the
or-
reason because normally I like to have the more quicker hard drive possible and 32 gigabyte of RAM. Finish like easy like this. Anyway, thanks. So no answer. And Charles, for you?
For me, I'm not a fan of having your own device, physical device with your
I know.
server. Like
So
just
you are more near,
virtualize
you are
it and
more
let
near
somebody
Fabio, okay.
else who knows what they're doing, like run that hardware. You know,
I know.
that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I would say if you're just trying to decide what OS to run on your own box, I think the answer is you should probably just stick to what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
But if you're asking whether to use your own box or to go into the cloud, normally I would say go into the cloud. There's so many advantages.
Thank you. So Fabio, I don't win. Fabio, we are 50-50, okay.
Well,
I'm more
Fabio's still
comfortable
right.
in one way, and Fabio is more comfortable on his way, but it's okay.
Yeah. Just curious. So, Alessandro, was he successful in running FileMaker on this Raspberry Pi?
Excuse me?
You said Fabio was using FileMaker server on Raspberry Pi?
Yes, Fabio make more than this. Fabio buy a Synology NAS and he install FileMaker on that. Okay, and also he's very happy. Yeah. Okay, exactly. You know, and also he ran on the Leader Raspberry, but he want to buy a 8 gigabyte of RAM version that is very rare to have it on the but for Leader service it worked great and it's great, but I don't think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think that this example you can put in practice, and I think that in his way and in your way you can only use this for microservice, not to substitute a regular.
I think it really depends what you're going to use it for. For example, BetterForms Enterprise runs on a Docker, and it could run on Raspberry Pi very, very easily. So that means you can have a fully self-contained, pretty in-depth.
No, but you remember your way is also because you are better form oriented, and better form oriented use a server like a container, and you only use script and container like a FileMaker server. For me, better form is an extension on a solution of FileMaker. Maybe I need more power and more consistency on the server side.
All right, we're going to have our giveaway draw. It's surprising how many people, there's lots of people here, yet how many people get drawn and don't, and like it's like a bias thing. Jeroen, is he here?
Yeah, we're here. We're still here.
Ah, perfect. There we go. All right, let me just send this off to Madalena and we should be all set.
Thank you, guys.
Congratulations.
Happy me.
All right. All right. Yeah, super. Madalena will contact you in the next little bit to get all your information there. I'm going to stop our recording, but we can keep hanging out and stuff and shoot the breeze, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody who came out today. And please do let us know for content for future Friday Lives, because we're always looking for ideas. And if you want to present some things, we'd love to hear about it, what you're doing. It doesn't have to be about BetterForms. It can be about anything, FileMaker development or developmental industry like would be great. All right. Have yourselves a great weekend and thank you.